All right, thanks everybody for tuning in. We are doing another episode of the 88 Crime Cold Case Podcast, Cold Case Files Podcast to be correct, in collaboration with Tucson Police Department. We're going to be talking about an unsolved homicide today. Anyone with information is urged to contact 88 Crime. Tipsters remain anonymous. You can call 520-882-7463. Collect calls are accepted, or you can download the mobile app, P3 Tips, free download for Androids or iPhones. Data charges may apply on that. Or you can go to 88crime.org and visit the website and submit information that way. All right, gentlemen, let's talk about this case. Before we do so, let's have you introduce yourselves. Steve, you were on the last one, but we have somebody else here with us, and we'll start with you.
My name is David Miller, and I'm a detective in Tucson PD's Cold Case Homicide Unit.
Thanks for being here today.
And I'm Steve Acevedo, and I'm Dave's partner.
Dave's partner.
In Cold Case Homicide.
Okay, thanks for being here today. Let's talk about this case. We're going to be talking about a 6-year-old girl. And this goes back into the 90s, if I'm not correct, right?
Correct.
All right, so let's dive into give us some information about the victim, where it happened, who she was living with.
This case takes us back to 1994. Specific date itself is December 19th of 1994, and it happened what's kind of affectionately known as the 29th Street corridor, and specifically an apartment complex at 4141 East 29th Street. That at the time was known as the Rella Verde Apartment complex, and was a location of where the victim resided with her family.
Okay, was the victim in school? She's 6 years old, so was she enrolled in a school or anything nearby?
So at that time and on that specific date itself, she was kind of in transition. The family had recently moved to the complex itself, and I at the time it was the holiday break, winter recess time, and she was in between schools. The neighborhood schools at the time for elementary were Roberts Elementary, and then the middle school was Naylor Elementary. She was of elementary age and more than likely would have been enrolled at Roberts.
Okay. When was the last time Esther Lizette Galaz was seen?
The day of her reported disappearance, and I'll let Dave cover some specific details as to the time and manner itself, but it was believed that she was seen by a sibling.
Okay.
In and around the apartment complex. And again, this is 1994. It was a weekday itself back in December of 94, on the day that she went missing.
Yeah, so it was roughly around dusk time, and Esther had just gone back to her apartment where her family lived for a few minutes. Her mom and younger sister had left the apartment to go to a nearby store. Esther ended up leaving the apartment in search of her mom and sister. And as she did that, her older brother, who was watching her younger sister, saw her leaving the apartment, which was on the second floor and faced south towards 29th Street. And that, by all accounts, is the last known sighting of her prior to her disappearance that day.
Okay, so we have a map. Are you guys cool if we pull that map up on the screen here? So the area of interest is, you said 29th?
Yes.
Okay. So here's the map. Columbus Boulevard, Belvedere Avenue, and East 22nd Street.
Yes.
So that, on that map there, is that just an open field that's there? Can you keep that up, please? Map there, is that just an open field or that time?
So that's actually an image from 1996. It was the closest one we could find to December of 94. And the lines there that are kind of like quarter circles is an open area that used to be a drive-in movie theater long before this. So it was an open desert-type area just north of one of the schools. And there's an empty lot that above that, north of that, which is separated by a dry wash, down to the lower left hand of the map, which would be the southwest, is a church, and then to the north of the church is another desert lot, and beyond that, I believe it was a library at the time. And this area has since been built up quite a bit.
Okay, bring up I believe it's a newer map you guys sent. Let's have that come up. Okay, 2024 contact review. So what does this mean? What is this map showing?
So this map in the lower left-hand side of the map, which is the southwest quadrant, there's a building that looks kind of like a T. That is the complex that Esther was living at with her family at the time she went missing. The outlying boxed area in red is an area that was canvassed by door-to-door contact with people in the neighborhood, to include the apartment complexes around there. This is still an area that we would like to bring focus to. Even though the canvas was pretty, detailed and well done, there may have been people that lived in that area at the time that were not contacted for whatever reason, or they may have had some sort of concern or a small detail that they didn't share with police at the time because they didn't think it might be relevant to the investigation. So we're asking anybody who's familiar with that area or lived in that area at that time, with any little bit of information they can provide would be helpful.
What did police learn about that incident at that time during the interviews and the canvassing?
Sure. We can discuss a little bit of the initial response. By obviously the family began to kind of look and search the apartment complex for approximately an hour and a half before a call to 911 was made. At that time, there was an initial response by uniformed police responding out of the Midtown Patrol Division. When they arrived, they began an initial response with additional units at the time. In fact, in 1994, the police service dog unit, or canine unit, was initially dispatched as well to assist with an area search. But initially, it was the apartment canvass by uniformed personnel in an effort to try to locate her. Again, 6 years old. Was she in an apartment? A lot of speculation could have been, was initially made about her specific whereabouts, and then from the apartment complex began a more comprehensive response by, at the time, it's referred to as the dependent child unit or the child physical abuse unit, which is common for missing persons protocol for juveniles. We now have the sort detail that could respond. But back then in 1994, initially it was the dependent child unit that responded for investigative response.
So right now we're talking, where we're at in this podcast, we're talking about the missing person criteria, right? That's where we're at. When does this case change to the homicide investigation? What led up to the change? What information was gained? So
I'll let Dave cover that specific point, because a lot of times in these types of investigations themselves, it's generally after the fact,
right,
or at the discovery point,
yeah,
is when the homicide unit will take over the investigation.
So about less than 24 hours from Esther's disappearance, a citizen walking their dog through the area of a dry wash in that open field discovered Esther's body. It was about 5:30, 5 p.m. on the 20th of December. Again, during that entire period that she was missing, there was a large police presence searching for her. Vehicles, a command post was set up. So we were highly visible at the time. But once he discovered Esther's body, then the homicide unit at the time took over the investigation as the primary unit. They go to the scene. They begin their investigation. We can't speak too much about the actual crime scene itself, but
right,
there was very evident trauma to Esther. And then subsequent to that, the amount of interviews and 88 crime tips and other sorts of tips from the community came in based on some information that was released to the media at the time. I think there was upwards of 650 tips that were received and investigated during the initial investigation. And prior to her discovery, going back in time, the detectives went and discussed what Esther had been doing that day prior to her disappearance, and she'd been running around the complex like all little kids, playing with other kids, and there wasn't really anything that could pinpoint what led to her disappearance. It was just she was doing normal kid things. So if we could go back to the area on the map, I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, no, for sure. Do you want the area of interest again?
Yeah, with the smaller red square around the, there it is.
Okay.
So again, where the old drive-in used to be, there's a crevice, which is a dry wash area. Mm-hmm. There was some information that was obtained during the investigation from a few people that discussed like kids, juveniles, other people kind of hanging out in that wash area, the empty fields, playing, hanging out, drinking beer, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So we realized that people who live in that neighborhood and area kind of know all of the nuances and details of where groups of people hang out, what they do, far more than any detective can learn just by talking to people. So again, if there are still people that recall that area very well, whether they hung out there themselves or were aware of family members or friends that hung out there to try and piece together, maybe get some people with information, with direct knowledge of others that hung out there, essentially. More witnesses, try and develop a suspect in this case.
Technology-wise, during this time, what was available that was significant to be used in this case? Was DNA available? What was available at that time? I know we're talking 30 years ago, right? It's hard to believe 1994 was 30 years ago, but what was available at that time?
As far as forensics go,
Yeah.
DNA was in its infancy almost. The Tucson Police Department, we had those capabilities beginning around that time. I think DNA originally came out in 88 or 89 out of England. But the amount of biological material in 1994 to develop a DNA profile was massive compared to what it is now. The advancements, it's much more affordable for departments. There's organizations that can help fund for expenses, and it's much more capable. It's amazing the amount of advancements that have happened in the forensic world. Mm. And then word of mouth was pretty much how things got distributed, information, traditional media, and now there's it's a 24-hour news cycle, 7 days a week. Information's more readily available to people to digest, and then also provide us with information in a much more efficient manner than going door to door. But that's something that's still required in these cases, is that face-to-face contact with people.
And just to add, in terms of that area itself, we're discussing specifically, the area of 22nd and Columbus, the neighborhoods to the south, east, and west of that area where this incident occurred. But Dave's exactly right. Everything from door-to-door canvassing to individuals who may have seen any piece of information or observed something sort of out of the ordinary. Things back in the day that were commonly looked at itself are investigative things like shoe impressions, fingerprints. That kind of investigative technique was used. Additionally, I think simple beat patrol officers who were familiar with the area, who were in the community itself, knowing children. School resource officers were used in this initial investigation as well, because she was so young, to try to identify some of the playmates or witnesses that were present.
Was there any other agencies involved in this case as far as collaboration, or still involved?
Well, I think currently, there was later an organization referred to by their acronym NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Information subsequent to the investigation itself, they had participated along with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Okay, and I'm reading something about the FBI. It says VICAP program. Is that something still in play? What was that back then?
I'll let you speak on that.
Back then, it was a national database that they were developing to try and find commonalities between crimes from, state to state that have, similar MOs, signatures, types of victims. Back then, it was you would fill out a form, answer a series of questions, provide that information to the FBI. And VICAP stands for the violent. Oh, geez, I can't believe I forgot that.
It's okay. We can have let's have the director's box.
Yeah,
Just Google this for us, Raul.
I believe it's.
It's my understanding is that the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program,
Right.
itself. So V capital V little I CAP.
Yeah.
In and of itself, like David mentioned, it's a way for investigators to share information across the country of similar, as you say in law enforcement, MOs,
right.
Similar victim profiles, commonalities are often made also with respect to offender information. If information is submitted through VICAP itself, which is managed by the FBI, offender information can be shared or compared to surrounding states or a region. Case in point, Steve, using myself as an example, Steve Acevedo was in California from 1985 to 1995, and he's associated with said crimes. We've been able to attribute those. We now know him to be living in Florida. That's sort of how VICAP can share information itself.
Right.
But similar investigations, I would imagine, if children are either reported missing or murdered, that VICAP participation would be crucial for sharing information.
Okay, so this clarifies this was under a much bigger scope.
Yes,
Certainly.
Yeah. What is important about this case as far as the public? Like how can we stress the importance of still remembering that day, thinking about details of that day, and how they can become relevant?
Yeah. Over the years, the case has been continually worked by people in our crime lab, other detectives. It's never been forgotten. It's one of those cases that when you go to sleep at night, you think about it, or you try to go to sleep, but you think about it. What can be done, what's being missed, what outside the box ideas can we bring to the investigation. As far as keeping it and why the public should remember it is these children are the most innocent and vulnerable people in our community, and they bring happiness to everybody. And for something like this, so evil to have occurred to Esther, as well as any other children that this could happen to, we should never stop thinking about it and remembering it. To just make all the children, their parents, the entire community safer, and allow them to be children and not have to live in fear of things like this happening.
Agreed. Gentlemen, you got anything else you want to add to this case for this Cold Case Files podcast?
Certainly, again, to just emphasize the idea that the information itself, that no matter how small the detail it was or observation, and again, we're going back to, specifically December 19th of 1994. To be more specific, it was a Monday evening into a Tuesday. Tuesday evening afternoon is when Esther was located. It would be important to come out and after 30 years, this month, we believe it is of utmost importance to have the appeal to the community to share information or communicate with us, either through 88 Crime, the P3 Tips app, if they wish to remain anonymous, or they can contact the Tucson Police Department directly at 520-791-4444 and request to speak with Detective Miller or myself.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to this podcast and or viewing the case Esther Lizette Galaz. Again, if you have any more information, refer to the available avenues mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, and we'll also have it in the show description. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Discover the power of 88 Crime, where your anonymous tips are rewarded with cash. When you call in anonymously with a tip, you are given a code. With the code and a password, you can walk into a bank and redeem your reward anonymously. If your anonymous tip results in a felony arrest, you can claim up to $2,500 cash reward. Let's stop the silence on crime and strive for a safer community. For more information, please visit 88crime.org or call 88crime.